welcome to Mom's Writers Club. I'm Sarah,
And I'm Jessica.
and today we are going to talk about our favorite craft books.
Well, before we get any further, if you could please give us a like and subscribe, that would be great. And now we will show you our favorite. You got them? You ready?
Yeah.
Fan them out.
Okay, wait a minute, because I got four.
Craft books. Oh yeah, she's got one on mine, so I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
why don't you go first? Let's pick
All
one
right,
and get rolling.
So two of these kind of go hand in hand a little bit. They're different books, and these are the two that everybody's heard of. So we'll just kind of breeze through them. They are Story Genius and Save the Cat Writes a Novel. They are excellent. We'll start with this one.
I have both those books.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers do. And if you don't, you probably should. So Save the Cat Writes a Novel takes you through the basic beats of storytelling, adapted in such a way that it fits writing a novel versus its original version, because the original version of this book was actually, I think, for screenwriting.
Mhm.
And the nice thing about it is that when I first started writing, I just kind of started writing, which is great, except, at some point you need to have like an inciting incident and a midpoint and your B plot and on
Some
and
structure,
on and on.
yeah.
Yeah. So it teaches basic structure, so I don't go through this book like front to back every time I write a book, but I like to open to page 27 on the paperback copy, and I'll try to show you. It basically outlines the beats and where they should fall within your book. So I will either have this on my desk, it's like permanently folded to this page, or sometimes I'll print it out and have it up there. And I just try to kind of hit those beats. And you know what? You don't even have to do it when you're writing. You can also do it when you're revising. But as I've written more books and I think gotten a little bit better at it, I found it really helpful to keep that in mind. This book also explains what happens with each different beat. So for example, it divides it into three act structure. And for, let's say, act one, the first beat is opening image, and that would be a before snapshot of your hero and their world. And then each beat will have a little more detail and about what percentage of your book it should be at. And it just kind of gives you an idea of the structure of your story. It goes into a lot more detail and it talks about different types of stories.
Right. I like how he addresses kind of how this framework.
She.
Oh, she. Yeah. I think the original Save the Cat was a
Yeah.
guy. But yeah, I like how she addresses how this framework like adapts to a thriller versus a romance versus, like a comedy versus a tragedy, and what those different beats kind of mean in different contexts.
Totally. So I think that's a great book to have on your desk. And then Story Genius is the one that I feel like kind of goes hand in hand with it. And it is by Lisa Crone, who is a storytelling expert. And so the subtitle of her book is How to Use Brain Science to Go Beyond Outlining and Write a Riveting Novel. And as someone with a history in like science and medical stuff, I loved reading the like brain science behind the theory of story. I found it to be really fascinating. And then this is actually the book that I use every single time I write a book. I have this copy, which is falling apart. And then I also have an electronic copy I keep on my computer. And sometimes I will pull up like my Word doc and the book side by side, because it has different activities you do. And the general idea is figuring out what the story is that you're actually trying to tell versus like, sometimes we just start writing, which is great. But if we don't know what we're trying to do with that book, sometimes it's hard to get to that point, which as a pantser, I have written many books where I've had to go back and spend a lot of time revising because it took me the whole book to figure that out. And this book has really helped me at least start to figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah.
I still have a lot of revising, but it helps significantly. This, of all the books I'm going to recommend today, game changer to my writing. I would not have gotten an agent had I not read this book.
Right on.
What are you going to say?
Yeah, I feel like that book, my takeaway from that book was that it's a method to get at the inner character arc. If you happen to start a story idea more from like the like what happens, like this happens and then that happens and then that happens.
Yeah.
That method is a way of getting inside the character and getting at like what does this mean to the character, and what was their like goes back into their childhood or whatever,
what drives them. It's like the why, I think, is maybe how she says it.
Right. It really gets at like the inner arc,
because we could like hear a great plot, but if we don't have a character who we understand and care about to take us on that journey,
and a character who seems, it gets at like character consistency, when you have that thing in books that people I posted a tweet once that it was like, what drives you fucking crazy as a reader? Like, and
I remember that tweet.
so many people, tons of people responded. And I would say the, the by far the most common response was the character is doing something that just doesn't seem consistent. Like,
Yeah.
like it just doesn't seem like that person would do that,
Well,
or
not
that
only
came
that,
out
but
of
it doesn't
nowhere.
it
And
doesn't
I,
further why they are, well, like what you said, why they are doing what they're doing, but like how it also connects to the plot. Like how does it
yeah,
drive the story
yeah,
forward?
yeah. And the complaints were like, oh, this is just in there so that the plot it will go a certain direction, and it doesn't make sense for the character. And I feel
Yeah.
like Story Genius really gets at that, like really gets at getting deep into the character, so that what they are doing as they move through the story, is consistent on the inside. You know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Show us one of your books.
Okay, so I think now is a good time. Let's see. We'll save the warm fuzzy stuff for the end. I have a couple of really nice warm fuzzy writing books, and everybody
I'll
needs
I'll
a
move my warm
cheerleader.
fuzzy to the end as well.
Okay, yeah,
Because
everybody
my other one's not warm.
needs a cheerleader as a writer, but we'll start with like the sort of hard science writing books. So this is John Truby's Anatomy of Story, and this book scared the shit out of me the first time I read it. I was
It's
like, I bought it. I tried to read it and I was like, you are fucking kidding me. I cannot stick with you through. Okay, I'll show you what scared
it's complex.
the 23 steps of freaking, no, 22 steps of story structure. And I was like, I cannot hang with you for this. Like, that's crazy. That is
I
like,
I appreciate that was your reaction because I also have that book and
oh
it is
yeah.
also, I think, marked at about that page. Like I can tell
And
the
you're
book
just
is
like,
excellent.
you're
Yeah, but
like,
I
holy
haven't really
shit.
gotten past that. I've looked up like a few specific things based off of the table of
Okay.
contents, but I
So,
haven't.
so I do not recommend, so I sort of think of this book as Save the Cat on steroids. So anyway, I put this book down for like a year and a half. And then when I had finished this book and I was like, I have story problems, like I have structure problems. And what do I do? I came back to it and I really appreciated it in a whole different way. The second time I went through it, it's not like a step by step how to, as much as it seems like it with his 22 steps. I slowed down. I actually read all the words instead of trying to skip around. Like, how do I do this? Like, give me a list. I sat down and I actually read the chapters and the paragraphs and stuff. And he starts with his chapter two. Chapter one is like finding what to write about, and it's really good. Chapter two is on premise. And I think this book is worth it for chapter two alone because he really gets into what makes a great premise and really figuring it out early in the process. Not necessarily even like a pitch, but really just figuring out like what's the crux of the story and what is this story about? And he has this great sort of step by step way of going through it and thinking about it. And I found that when I approached this in a kind of a deeper way, like sort of slowed down and wasn't like, oh, give me the answer, John Truby, I was more like, I don't know, I was able to appreciate like how deep this book is.
Yeah, it is the most recommended book in other books I have found so far.
Mm.
Probably every other book on writing that I've read, which I've read quite a
Yeah,
few,
yeah,
recommends that, or they say, I
yeah,
first got this from John Truby.
yeah,
And I know he also does like workshops and stuff. He talks about
yeah.
it on his Instagram.
So I would say, this is an awesome book. Take your time. Like, do not try and absorb this all in one sitting. There's a couple of things that he does that I love. So he starts with the 7 steps of story structure rather than the 22, which is kind of he's trying to break us in. It doesn't really work, but what I really like is that he starts with weakness and need. Like that's the step number 1, and that kind of is like Lisa Cron.
Yeah,
Like
Story Genius.
what is your character's weakness and what do they need? And that's totally step number 1 in building your story structure. Rather than like, Save the Cat is a little more external in a way, like
Yeah, I
opening
agree.
image and inciting incident and stuff like this. He's like, what is your character's weakness and what do they need? And that's like
Mm-hmm.
the bedrock of the whole thing. So I really like that. I love this exercise on page 95 about character, which kind of challenges you to like, you not only have an antagonist and a protagonist that are in conflict with one another, he's like, you have probably several significant characters in your story, and they are all like, he's got this little graphic here with the X in the middle, and they are all in kind of conflict with each other, like their values, their morals, their goals, their, you know, what they're trying
Many
to
layers.
do, like they're all in conflict with each other. So once I actually came back to this book and like could tolerate it, I found myself coming back to it again and again and again. I mean, he has really great um, kind of methods for getting at, and he has like a whole bunch of different ones. And this is why it was a little overwhelming at first, is that I was like, oh my God, I just did this and now I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to do this. And we're still just talking about the premise, you know? But when I came back to it, I'm like, oh, there's all these different ways to kind of get at this thing that is so hard to articulate, you know, that like central character motivation. And he's got all these like different ways of getting at it. So, okay, what's next?
Let's do the Stephen King book. And my copy is in a box somewhere from moving.
Stephen King on writing.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. I actually listened to the audio version. Yeah, I listened to the audio version recently. And by the way, he reads it. So I would recommend it. I listened to it while I was running, like throughout several different runs. And it's cool because some of it is autobiographical, talking about his life and kind of how he got started in writing and some like really important moments in his writing life. And then there's this section where he's just like, okay, no more bullshit. I'm going to like tell you how it is. And he gives all this writing advice. And he used to be a teacher before he was a full-time writer. I don't recall what it was. Maybe, I feel like it was maybe like middle school or high school. And I want to say he taught English, but I might be wrong about all of that. So he's very good at articulating like these basic things in a way that is so understandable. And they are things that took me a couple of years to figure out. The writing is just so propulsive through this book. It's so interesting. And it's so interesting hearing about his life and how he got to be a writer and the early days of like sending in short stories to magazines. And then when he got his first book contract and, you know, he and his wife were living in a pretty like awful apartment, the way he describes it, and with his two kids. And just, it's a pretty cool story to like learn about one of the most famous US authors, like how he got his start, but also about, there are bits and pieces about the writing business, both like how it used to be and how it is now. And then there's this toolbox part that he talks about that hopefully Sarah can give us a little bit of insight into.
Yeah, so he says, I want to suggest that to write to your best abilities, it behooves you to construct your own toolbox and then build up enough muscle so you can carry it with you. Then, instead of looking at a hard job and getting discouraged, you will perhaps seize the correct tool and immediately get to work. He says common tools go on top. So he tells this whole story about like his grandfather's toolbox, which is like one of those, you open it up and it's got like a tray on the top and a tray in the middle and then a big thing at the bottom. He says the commonest of all, the bread of writing, is vocabulary. In this case, you can happily pack what you have without the slightest bit of guilt and inferiority. He talks about like proper vocabulary versus street vocabulary. He says you'll also want grammar at the top shelf of your toolbox, and don't annoy me with your moans of exasperation or your cries that you don't understand grammar. And you never did understand grammar. You flunked the whole semester in sophomore English. Writing is fun, but grammar sucks the big one. So that gives you a feeling about his voice.
Yeah.
He's like, don't bother
really
me with that.
It's a really fun voice. And he like totally calls you out on your bullshit the whole time.
Yeah.
He's like, I laughed a lot.
Relax, chill. We won't spend much time here because we don't need to. So,
you know what else?
Yeah.
I very rarely cry from like any book, even, you know, wonderful fiction books. And this book made me cry.
It did?
Yeah, near the end. Yeah. Anyway, I would highly recommend it. It's great, both like reading about a writer who's been very successful, but also a lot of great advice on how to be a writer and your actual writing. And it's really good.
Yeah, it's really fun to read. It's a really good voice. I actually might reread that.
Yeah, or the audiobook. The audiobook was so fun to listen to his like his intonation of it.
Yeah.
Okay, next book. I also listened to the audiobook version of this one, but
I have not read that one.
Yeah, I fully intend to read it again because it was so good. Like in the actual
order that as soon as we finish.
This is the author who wrote Fight Club and has written many other books as well. And in some ways it is similar to the Stephen King novel in that he talks a lot about like autobiographical stuff. There's a lot of humor in it. And then he also has a section that talks about more kind of how to, what to do, what not to do. He has a lot of other books he recommends checking out. He talks a lot about the business of writing and how it has transformed over time.
Mhm.
And anyway, it's great. And the audio version is also great. But on to your warm, fuzzy ones.
Okay, so let's move on to, we'll move on to the warm, fuzzy ones. Okay, so this book, like hardly any, the Modern Library, this is hard for me to say, the Modern Library Writers Workshop by Stephen Koch.
Say it 5 times fast.
Modern Library Writers Workshop. This is like the, so I've got it's underlined in purple crayon. I spilled coffee on it so that you know that I love it. Anything I really truly love, I spill coffee on. This book I have come back to over and over and over again. At first, just to like propel me along, to like give me encouragement, and now that I'm, further along in this journey, to like get back in touch with things that I feel like are important. I wish I could like I would read the whole freaking book out loud to you if we had time and you cared. But I'm going to just read a couple of things. So this is the very beginning of the book, is called Beginnings. And he says the only way to begin is to begin, and begin right now. If you like, begin the minute you finish reading this paragraph. For sure, begin before you finish reading this book. I have no doubt the day is coming when you will be wiser or better informed or more highly skilled than you are now, but you will never be more ready to begin writing than you are right at this minute. That's like his voice through the whole book. It's so cool. Like I think he's a professor of English or writing or something. And so he's got this very sort of erudite, articulate voice, but he's so warm about it. Okay, so one reason that I really appreciate this book is that he liberally quotes women. Jess and I have found that many, many craft books are heavily skewed towards using samples from male authors.
Some of the best known ones are only males, or there's like one woman, and kind of irritates me, to be
possibly
honest.
Particularly the ones that sort of originated in screenwriting, but I'm not really sure. So he has a section in here about permission, and we sort of talked about, we did an episode early on about giving yourself permission, and I think that's important early in your process, but I think it's also super important when you're ready to take a risk or change something that you're doing, or when you feel like when you feel like I want to try doing something different and I'm kind of freaked out about it. And he quotes Toni Morrison, who says, "When I read women's biographies and autobiographies, even accounts of how they got started writing, almost every one of them had a little anecdote which told about the moment someone gave them permission to do it. Somebody said, okay, go ahead." Then he talks about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is just a genius, who says, "One night, a friend lent me a book of short stories by Franz Kafka. I went back to the pension where I was staying and began to read The Metamorphosis. The first line almost knocked me off my bed. The first line reads, as Gregor Samsa awoke that morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a giant insect." Gabriel Garcia Marquez says, "When I read the line, I thought to myself that I didn't know that anyone was allowed to write things like that. If I had known, I would have started writing a long time ago." And then Stephen Koch, who wrote this, the Modern Library Workshop, says, "I cannot tell you how many people have sat in my office astonished to discover that they were allowed to write the way they wanted to write." And he says, "But even as you look for permission, you are unlikely to succeed as a writer unless you learn to cherish and exploit whatever in you is nervy and defiant, the rather transgressive you who insists that no matter what other people want, no matter what other people say you should think, you are going to say what you want to say in your way or not at all." So I just come back to there's stuff, I mean, it's literally underlined in purple crayon, and I come back to that stuff over and over again. Oh, and the one other part of this that I really loved is he has this section on page 82 called "The Sense of Rightness." And it talks about that feeling when you're writing, or perhaps when you're revising, also when you're reading your stuff and you're like, oh, that's wrong. Oh, that's not good. That's not what I wanted. No, that's not good. No. You know, that feeling where you're just like, no. And he talks about, you can be guided at every step by only one intuition, your own sense of rightness. But the sense of rightness can come only after you have been guided away from 10,000 wrong turns by your sense for what is wrong. The sense of rightness and the sense of what is wrong have no independent existence. That little voice inside says to you, this is wrong, all wrong, and you panic and think you have failed and then quit. So he says, you must listen to them both, trusting that your intellect is capable of responding to their cues. But that just, I don't know, for some reason, that part of the book came to me at a really important time, fairly early in my process as I was learning to write, when my my taste and my discernment was way, way ahead of my ability as a writer. And Ira Glass, who is the host of This American Life on NPR, has a great talk. You can probably find it on YouTube. I bet we could link it below, about being at that point in your process, about how your taste is killer, and but your ability just isn't there yet, and you kind of got to work with that tension until your ability catches up with your taste. And so reading that part about your sense of rightness, and that the sense of wrongness is just as important. It's the other side of that coin, made me feel so much better about feeling like all my work was shit. Because I was like, okay, that feeling that all my work is shit is gonna guide me toward what I really feel like my voice should be.
Yeah.
So anyway, that book is full of stuff like that. He's so encouraging. He's like the creative, the warm, fuzzy, like smart creative writing professor that you always wish you had, and that's close to my heart.
Anyway, warm fuzzy. I think a lot of our Moms Writers Club people have read this one. This is a book where I once again listened to the audio version because that is what I do when I run, and then went out and bought the hardback version because it was so good. This is by Elizabeth Gilbert. It's the same person who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, but it's totally different than that. So if you loved it, know that it's not like that. If you didn't love it, it is also not like that. She writes in first person, and she talks a lot about her own writing journey. And so this is actually not filed in the writing section at a bookstore. It is filed in like
self-help.
I think self-help.
Yeah.
It is an inspirational book. And I'm just going to read the back of it because I think it kind of says it nicely. Creativity is sacred, and it is not sacred. What we make matters enormously, and it does not matter at all. We toil alone, and we are accompanied by spirits. We are terrified, and we are brave. Art is a crushing chore and a wonderful privilege. The work wants to be made, and it wants to be made through you. And that's actually a great way to describe what this book is about. It's called Big Magic, and it basically kind of talks about writing being magical in a way, and that we have like a responsibility to it. She tells some really amazing stories in it about her examples in life of how writing is magical. And it's so interesting because I have had similar experiences to her, and it really makes you think that there's like something going on there.
Then like, woo.
Supernatural. No, totally. And it's just one of those books that you cannot put down. If you are ever in need of like kind of like what Sara was talking about, needing permission or to feel like you're good enough, or if you feel like, I'm not as good as that person, or your rough drafts suck, any of that, this book will like change your life. So the table of contents is pretty brief. It just has like big sections and talks about having courage with art, permission, persistence. One thing I really like is that she's just kind of matter of fact. Like one line is, you are not required to save the world with your creativity. Like your book does not have to be some mind-blowing like thing that like everybody loves. Like people are going to not love it, and you are allowed to write what you want to write. If you like writing genre fiction that is just fun, cool. Like that is your art, and that doesn't make it less. And I really appreciate that. It talks about how you don't need to go to school to be a writer. Obviously, she made a ton of money and sold a ton of books and has been able to basically do whatever she wants because Eat, Pray, Love was so successful. She talks about finding writing teachers, and it talks about if you didn't start writing in your 20s, that doesn't mean it's too late for you. And that I didn't start seriously writing till my mid 30s. So
and I didn't start seriously writing until my early mid 40s.
Yeah. So you have no excuse. It's a really wonderful book. It is a book that I feel like applies to everyone and is so worth reading. It's gorgeous. I know a lot of Moms Writers Club people actually recommended it to me, and they were spot on.
Yeah.
Do you have any other books?
I have one last one, and this is really obscure. Anyway, so this is called On Being Stuck. It's by Lorraine Herring. She's really into mindfulness meditation. She applies it to being a writer. And she has these exercises for when you're stuck. And one thing that I really appreciated about her come from was that she breaks up like writer's block into sort of two big categories. She says one of them is writer in process blocks. She says writer in process blocks occur when you are working on your book and the book is requiring you to face parts of yourself or your beliefs about the book that you'd rather not acknowledge.
That's interesting.
And she talks about that. And then she talks about work in progress blocks. And she says, she makes this whole analogy to how she can't drive a stick shift automobile. And no matter how hard she tries, and someone got her out in the middle of an empty parking lot and to try and do it, and she just froze. Like she just couldn't do it. She couldn't figure out where to put her foot and all that stuff. And she says, this analogy to writer's block can show you the very real physical immobility that can occur if you're faced with a combination of heavy expectations and lack of skill. She says, craft holds up art, which I love. Work in progress blocks relate to problems with the product itself. They may include issues with structure, characters, dramatic conflict, research, and your current level of ability to complete the project as envisioned. Right. So that kind of goes back to that, your taste, your vision, as opposed to your current craft level.
Yeah, I like that.
So I really love that she kind of breaks those two things apart, right? She's like, it is like writer's block is kind of cliche, but it's also kind of scary when you feel like this really central part of who you are is like not functioning, you know, or there's like, sorry, go ahead.
Do you feel like you get writer's block?
Sometimes.
Often. Yeah, sometimes.
Not often. But when it happens, it's like, it's a struggle. And I don't know, I just really appreciate, like, I feel like I experience writer's block more of the work in progress block, which really for me doesn't even have to relate to a certain work. It's about what I want to accomplish versus what I feel capable of actually doing, you know, and the distance between those two things. And then she does this really cool thing, which I kind of appreciate as like a little bit of a woo-woo hippie meditator, you know, when you visualizations.
Yeah.
Works well for me. She goes and she has these whole like guided visualization things where you actually personify your writing, the actual work that you are writing, and yourself, the writer, and you have those different things talk to each other. And
so that sounds so strange, but I'll bet it works so well.
It works so well. And what she had, one thing she talks about is dialogue example between author and writing. So you personify the author and you personify the writing, right? She says, this example has two parts. In the first part, you, the author, are asking the questions and your writing is responding. You are literally sitting in a chair with your eyes closed, imagining, like visualizing these things as people or as balls of energy or plants or ducks or whatever. And then you'll reverse roles. As the author, you're asking, what do you need? How can I help? And how will you feel when you get what you need? And like I did this, I went into the space, I personified my writing, I did the whole thing, and I swear to God, it spoke back to me. And it fucking worked. I mean, it was amazing. Cool. It basically, I was at this point where I was like, this project isn't working. You know, like I can't do this. Like this sucks. It's just is not, the whole premise is wrong, blah, blah, blah. And I went in and I asked those questions, and my writing was basically like, have patience with me, you know? And I was like, holy shit. Okay. You know? So a huge like game changer for me when I got stuck. So
it's a little different than personifying it, but it reminds me a little bit of when I sit down and write about my writing, like objectively, trying to figure out what's going on. But a little different because.
What do you mean, like when you write about your writing?
Like I'll literally just open a document and be like, "This book is not working. I need this character to do this thing, but it's not." And like writing about it will often help me think about it a little differently, and the answer will come to me. So it's not the same, but it's kind of similar.
Right. Sometimes I do this thing where I have a conversation with myself where I'm telling myself the story, but then I'm being my skeptical other self, and like me will be left justified and the responses will be right justified.
Like
And
you format it?
I literally go back and forth and format it. And I'm like, this, and this happens. And then the other side, the right justified answer is like, well, why would that happen? Why wouldn't they just do blah, 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 blah? And then I'm
That's
like,
so
well,
cool though. That's a great idea. I mean, you're basically having the conversation with yourself that you would otherwise like, have with a CP or with a writing
exactly.
friend or an editor or
Right.
yeah.
Only it's you. And it's like, you understand yourself better than all those people. All right. Is that everything?
I think that's everything. Thank you everyone for joining us. We would love to know what your favorite craft book is and why. We'd
Oh,
love to get
yeah.
some new recommendations.
Please drop them in the comments. I'm always after new craft books. I
Yeah.
have like 40 something of them and I'm always on the hunt. There's always
Yeah.
like a nugget of gold in all of them.
I totally agree. Give us a like and a subscribe. We have our chats every other Wednesday night, and very soon we will be doing a live chat of some sort. We don't really know what we're doing, but we will figure it out in
Like a
time.
write in. Yeah, I know. I'm
Yeah, a
excited
write
about
in.
that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone
Okay.
for joining us. Bye.
Bye bye.